Blog Talk Radio.
Free and thinking people are enslaved zombies and hypocrites. Good evening and welcome. This is Sancho Early Jones, and you're listening to SHTF411.com radio. This is Monday, December 6th, 2010. For tonight's show, the topic is disclosure, that is, extraterrestrial disclosure, with Mr. Stephen Bassett. Mr. Bassett is a leading advocate for ending the 63-year government-imposed truth embargo regarding extraterrestrial presence engaging the human race. He is also the executive director of the Paradigm Research Group, the Political Action Committee, X-PPAC, and the executive producer of the X Conference. His work has been extensively covered by national and international media. To learn more about and get involved, please visit his Paradigm Research Group websites, which include paradigmresearchgroup.org, exopolitics.net, factsonwashington.org, x-conference.com, contact2010.com, and x-ppac.org. You can also put Mr. Stephen Bassett into any given search engine, and his sites will be the first up. Tonight's program will be a one-hour interview with questions from the SHTF411.com interview thread for Stephen Bassett, and also on-the-fly questions from the SHTF411.com mini-chat. And on to our guest. Good evening and welcome, Stephen. You're on the air.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to have you here. So, tell us about disclosure.
Disclosure is the fundamental goal of an excellent political movement that's been underway now for a good solid 20 years, going back to 1991. It is a capital D disclosure, and it's a formal event. It is the acknowledgment of the extraterrestrial presence by world governments. It is the day that the leading governments of the world, starting with likely a single nation, probably the United States, acknowledges what, well, many millions of people have already figured out for themselves, that we're not alone in the universe, that non-human intelligence is gauging us right now and has been for some time. It's a big event. Mm-hmm. It's probably the most profound event in human history. It's a big deal. There's a lot involved, a lot of implications. And achieving that event is the goal of this movement. It's that simple.
What now, with your personal involvement, how did that begin? I mean, you know, I was actually watching some interviews with you, and from what I understand, you personally have not seen a UFO. I was a skeptic, but about 3 years ago in Panama City, I saw a UFO. How did you get involved with this?
Well, just one doesn't need to have seen a UFO or have had contact with extraterrestrials to figure out that this is a real subject and the issue is important. Mm-hmm. It's like there are a lot of very fine physicists out there that have never seen a quark, but they devote their whole lives to studying them. My story is not special. I simply decided I wanted to get involved in something that I felt was important and might help make a difference in the world, and I made that decision when I was in my late 40s. I had a background in science and business and stuff that really didn't amount to much, but I'd always had an interest in the subject. I'd always been paying attention to the odd article, the odd story that would turn up regarding this phenomena. And just based on what I had seen by about the age of 20, I was fairly certain this phenomenon was real. But so what? What do you do about it? There really nothing I could do about it. However, by the time I initiated my involvement with the issue in '96, this whole thing had moved quite far along, and it seemed to me that it was getting ready to get resolved. It's taken longer than I thought, frankly, but I understand why. So that's it. It's really not a complex story. I'm an activist. There are activists involved with issues all over the world, environmental issues, anti-war issues, you name it. My issue is resolving this political impasse that we call the truth embargo, which was the policy of the United States government, initiated by the U.S. government, informally in '47, formalized by early '53, and with the support of its allies, that the issue of the presence of these beings had to be suppressed from the people. It had to be contained to the extent possible, using whatever tools the government had available, until such time as the government was ready to reveal it. That policy has served its purpose and has to end.
What would be the Now, as far as you being an activist, I've been listening to you, and you are a great activist. I've been really impressed with some of your presentations and your line of thinking. But let me ask you, what do you believe is the number one reason for the suppression of extraterrestrial life in combination with our life or interacting with our life? Why are they suppressing it?
There's not a simple answer to that. There's a book there, a couple of books. Well, there have been books written about it. I certainly encourage your listeners to read UFOs and the National Security State by Richard Dolan, both volumes. His recent book with Bryce Zabel, AD After Disclosure. Missing Times by Terry Hansen. These are books that kind of give you a sense of the history of this. This is a very huge story. But the short answer to that very important question, one of the top 5 exopolitical questions that you can ask, is that the government was faced, whatever the government knew about extraterrestrials prior to 47, and we think they did know something. We think that there's evidence of things happening going back even into the 30s, but it was very well contained, not a public problem, not a public issue. But all that changed in the early 47 when an explosion of sightings occurred all over the world, which is to say the ETs became more active, more aggressive, more open, ostentatious. At this point, the government was faced with actually having to address the public's interaction with this issue. At the same time that they were by then aware that the Soviet Union, which clearly was going to be our next opponent, was working on the testing of their first atomic bombs, that they were working on missile systems just like us, using German scientists just like us, and that we were headed for potentially a nuclear war. The next war would be nuclear. This was a big problem. And in the middle of that, they've got extraterrestrials flying all over the place, making little effort to not be seen. Then they had a crash vehicle at Roswell in the early July of 47 that was seen by a lot of people, and bodies were seen, and witnesses all over the place. They really, at that point, they understood this issue has to be dealt with in a very aggressive way, and they had to make a decision. They made that decision by 53, and that decision is that whatever the phenomena posed for the human race, the public's involvement with it had to be contained. That was the decision they made for national security reasons. The thinking was that by 53, of course, the Cold War was well underway, and they were envisioning a nuclear war of mass destruction. And the argument was raised, I'm sure, that the presence of extraterrestrials becoming common knowledge would just create too complicated a geopolitical equation to solve. The potential for destabilization or a mistake would only be greater. And that until the Cold War issue was more understood, or at least resolved perhaps, this issue had to be contained. So the Cold War became not only the fundamental rationale for maintaining the truth embargo, but it made the cover for it, because under the cover of the Cold War and all that we had to do to, quote, defend ourselves against the Soviet Union, provided them all of the tools and cover they needed to conduct whatever they needed to do to address the ET issue. If that meant propaganda, if it meant disinformation, if it meant building underground facilities, whatever they needed to do, they were easily able to do, and no one was going to question it. So it was kind of an ideal situation for them from the standpoint of running the truth embargo, but it was still a very difficult problem that they were facing, and I have sympathy for them. And it's hard to completely second guess the decision to initiate the truth embargo. The problem is that the truth embargo's usefulness is over, and it has to end. Like all government policies, they're much easier to start than they are to end.
Do you believe that there are any governments